They are almost overwhelmed with curriculum material orders and managing those and getting those out to schools and teachers. They analyzed the 2008-09 test results, planning for literacy with principals and with our literacy coaches, and again the SMART Goal team retreat. In student services, they're meeting with staff and community members. Corey is, since he has just come on board. You spent a lot of time with a team on the pandemic influenza preparedness plan that you have seen, and revising and finalizing budgets and grant applications, quite a bit of work there, resolving student individual placement and service issues, and then preparing for special ed staff and student services staff orientation that's coming up. In financial services, preparing certainly for the annual independent audit. The preliminary 2009-10 budget requires lots of work throughout the organization at all levels. They have worked on an request for proposals for banking services, and we'll be moving that forward. Document Services has implemented a new online printing service, and finishing up summer project lists and work in facilities and grounds. Our administrative leadership team has conducted a summer workshop, and the title of that or theme for that was Leadership for Learning During Challenging Times, which we can all relate to. We look forward to our Summer Academy for Teachers that Learning Services has certainly been involved organizing, where our teachers are learning from their colleagues, and that is August 17th through 19th. On August 19th, Financial Services and Human Resources have combined together to hold a new teacher orientation. We also can thank the Chamber of Commerce for continuing their new teacher luncheon. That's always a treat and special to welcome our new teachers. August 20th and 21st is Probationary Teacher Professional Development. And then August 25th, we really welcome back all of our staff with a breakfast and an off-staff meeting. And Mark Kaiserschott is going to represent the board and welcome our staff back. And then, with all that preparation and a few more days at the school level and many other meetings for those days, our first day of school is Tuesday, September 1st. So that was a long list, and yet it doesn't even cover anywhere near the things that happen during the summer. But you want me to just keep moving on? The next thing on the list is WASB School News article. And this is a publication that comes out every month, and the Wisconsin Association of School Boards publishes. And they have approached us and asked us to write on HSD 2025, our strategic vision and plan. And the title of the article is Developing a Framework for 21st Century Learning. It will be in the October issue, and it really features our strategic vision and plan from conception all the way through to the implementation of the graduate learner outcomes that Sandy talked to you about just last meeting. And we should know that this strategic plan seems to be making the rounds in places that we don't necessarily know. When I was at the superintendent's legal conference, I was introduced to two superintendents who I had not yet met. And both of them, when I said I was from Hudson, said, "Oh, you have that strategic plan, that one that looks way out into the future for students." And we talked a little bit about that, and they were quite impressed. We also contacted a WASB consultant for some information that Dan will be sharing later from Governance and Policy. And she said, "Oh, I know your strategic plan. I've used it with another district." So it is seeming to make it an impact, not only in Hudson, but in other places as well, and I think we should be really proud of that. The next thing I want to talk about is some really good news. That's about Rivercrest and leadership in energy and environmental design. You know that we the board, with their vision, chose to go for LEED certification. And we have been notified that we have achieved gold status, and that's designated by the U.S. Green Building Council. Rivercrest is the first elementary school in Wisconsin to receive gold under these new LEED for school rating system. It's a higher level rating system, and we can really be proud that it's the first elementary school. It's the second school in the country to be honored under this new higher rating system. And it is the second school building in Wisconsin to receive gold in any LEED category. We also should be very proud of some new information that Hoffman has put together for us that has recently come out, and that is the total project cost of $57 per square foot is $57 per square foot less, or 29% below the average cost for public elementary schools built in Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. In 2008, according to the School Planning and Management 2009 construction report. So something really that we have this honor about reaching gold and really verifying for our community by an independent source that we promised to build this eco-friendly green school. And this really verifies that to our community. We have this LEED Gold now certification for Rivercrest, constructed at a cost per square foot that is well below the market, and that's coupled with the educational excellence that our students receive here and across the district. And that's, again, verification to our community about the high value they receive for their investment, and we certainly thank them for the referendum and their vote to build this school and move it forward to this level. A lot to be proud of. Certainly that leadership came from the board and the vision, and that's two boards, the board that passed the referendum and certainly this board that moved forward with the construction of the school. Also the design team, and that included Dick Minnick and Tim Erickson, Jim Stayskill, Pat Hodges, and myself. And then Hoffman, who, when we hired them as architects, we were looking for someone who had experience in a sustainable design. And they have come through for us as our architects and our construction managers. We also certainly thank Anderson Windows, who created a sustainable window especially for this school. And many people who come into the school talk about the light. The brightness of this school that comes through these beautiful wooden windows. We also, in this LEED certification, Camp St. Croix is recognized in our partnership with them as they help to enhance the environmental experiences and learning opportunities of our students. So with those kind of partnerships, how can we go wrong as a community? So we really thank all of our partners in our community for support for this school. And lastly, again, I have another good news announcement, and that is an Anderson Corporate Foundation grant. Certainly pleased to announce that the Corporate Foundation has awarded the district $20,500 to support the implementation of Project Lead the Way, our new pre-engineering program at the high school. And this aligns certainly with HSD 2025. And also we appreciate the Corporate Foundation's recognition of this program and how it will benefit the development of our students. And it meets their goals in the area of STEM, or science, technology, engineering, and math. So it meets their priorities and ours as well as we move forward. So thank you very much to the leadership and the vision of the Anderson Corporate Foundation.
Thank you, Mary. That's all good information, good news on many fronts. So with that, we'll move on to reports. Peg?
Good evening, everyone. Is it on? Okay, sorry. All right, good evening. I'm here tonight to share some more good news and some more work that we have to do. And so, Diane, I'll give you sort of a cue, and she will move the PowerPoint along. The principals and I have been working together for the last couple of weeks in terms of gathering the data that they have collected from the last year. And this data will then serve as inspiration for our work together in setting new goals and new action plans for our work. I would be remiss if I didn't start with our system for learning, and so you can put that slide up if you would, Diane, that first one. This was something that we designed together as an ALT team, and then we had a small group of administrators who actually were able to creatively create this visual that really tells about what the HSD system for learning is about. And first of all, if you look at the outside yellow ring, that really is the foundation of our flywheel. It's our vision, our beliefs, our purpose, and our graduate learner outcomes. At the beginning, or at the center of that, is how those connect to student learning. And like any wheel that has a center, you need to have spokes that connect it. And that would begin on the next slide, where you see our SMART goals. These spokes connect to the student learning, all of the initiatives and the focuses that we have within our district. So SMART goals is a driver for school improvement. We also have our learning interventions, and one of the things that we've been determining at every building is what are the interventions for kids that aren't learning, and what are the interventions for kids that have already learned. And so that's a spoke that helps to create that improvement in learning. We have another spoke, and that's best practice. And I recently read this great article that talked about, because you hear a lot in education about what best practices are, and it's because they spoke a little bit about best practices in the sense, compared it to the work of a surgeon, where if a surgeon did laser surgery and refused to look at new technology and new scientific evidence to show that different procedures would make a difference in the new type of laser surgery that you could have on your eye, it certainly wouldn't be the kind of surgeon we would want to go to. It's the same with professional best practice, that we are obligated to know what are the practices that are going to have leverage on student learning. And the final spoke then is assessment for learning. And obviously we need assessment to be able to know if our implementations are working, and to give feedback to students as well as teachers. So those spokes then are sort of a metaphor connecting then to student learning. You can do the next slide, Diane. With that, we need high support. If we've talked a lot about the high expectations that we have for learning and the high accountability. We need to have high support and able to really fuel that flywheel to move. And finally, we have our continuous improvement system. If you look very much at those arrows that go back and forth, that was really designed purposely to show that it is sort of a back and forth measure. For instance, if you had set goals, you study what the research best practices are to meet those goals, and then you implement it, then you've got to monitor and adjust. Is it working? Is it not working? You go back, you go forward, and that's what we mean by continuous improvement. So I wanted to remind you of that system for learning that we have. It's very much embedded in the work that we do with SMART goals. At this time, I'm going to ask the principals to come forward, and they will each talk about their goals and some other data achievements. We've worked real hard on really having some hard data that we're measuring success by, and you'll see that in the presentation this year. In addition to that, we'll do questions and comments at the end. So we'll start with Mr. Lucas from the high school.
Good evening. This is our second year of working on our SMART goals, focusing on improving overall student performance, and we focused on improving student performance, improving the A's, B's, C's, and D's by focusing on the students who are on the lower end of that continuum and the struggles that they have. And last year we made our improvement, we made our goal, we reached our goal, and that was 10%. We reduced the number of D's and F's by 10%. This year, we were fortunate enough, again, to lower those numbers, and we reached our goal of reducing the D's and F's by 7.99%, which is about 8%, which overall, over the 2 years, is an 18% reduction. And of course, as you reduce the lower end of those grades, the grades for the A's, B's, and C's are going to go up proportionally. The first bullet identifies the overall data that we had from 2008, which were to reduce the number of F's from 837 to 637, which was, now the numbers are overall percentages of the grades, so sometimes the percentages can be deceptive. But the bottom line was that we reduced our number of F's overall by 20.6%. And when we look at the other end of the continuum for the number of A's, our A's went up by 10.6% from 2007-2008 school year. So in addition to, when we look at some of the soft data, we have a number of interventions that we have that Peg talked about in our Wheel of Learning, and we also have our continued focus and improvement in assessment. And we really believe that the focus on assessment is making some key gains, and will continue to make some key gains as we move forward in looking at professional learning communities. One of those examples is our biology team was designed this year so that they had common planning time together, and they will have common planning time again next year. As a result of that, they were able to put 100% of their summative assessments together this year. And so the 4 of our biology teachers are giving the same assessments for each of their units. And that is, we're seeing gains and improvement in instruction as well. And on another note, we were very, very pleasantly surprised that our number of AP selections, AP students went up this year, which was quite impressive because we did a big promotion this year to encourage students to take more AP courses. We visited the classrooms. We had the counselors put more of a push on the importance of high academic courses during their high school to help them to get into the upper level colleges or to get into college in general. So we saw a 57% increase. And as we'll talk about later on down the road when we look at the AP scores in general, we also had a much higher success rate for the students who passed AP courses this year. So we're quite pleased with our results this year.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And now Mr. Koch from the middle school.
This is the second year for our math SMART goal, and the first we added language arts as part of the SMART goal process this year as well. Just a note to go along with the information on math. At the same time that we raised the bar as far as the target, we also increased the number of sections in our upper level math classes by 6, and then eliminated the third option that we'd had in math. So we now only had 2 offerings in math as well. So the challenge was indeed significant, but we're actually pleased with the fact that even though we did not hit the 77% as a target, we did improve over the baseline from a year ago. And that was, as you can see, 74.3% of those students received an A or B. And I'm going to comment on both of the SMART goals in just a second. And then in language arts, this is actually this is a pretty good example of, I think, exactly what we expect to have happen. When we did the baseline with regard to our language arts students being successful in an on-demand prompt, you can see the baseline was 23%. That's tantamount to saying, okay, when you do the preliminary, like a pre-test, and find out what it is that they sort of come to school with, they come to the classroom with, based on our goals with the writing, they scored 23% of those students were successful. After instruction focused on what we wanted to accomplish with the SMART goal, you can see the obvious results. I mean, from a statistical standpoint, it's actually kind of stunning. But in truth, it's just sort of the way it works. You set a target, you instruct focused on that particular target, and then obviously you hope to achieve that particular goal. So this was the first year for language arts in the SMART goal process, and we'll be adding 2 more next year. As far as some additional accomplishments are concerned, it's the very first one, actually, that I'm most pleased with at this point, because we also spoke to you earlier in the year about what we're doing with assessment and common summative assessments after every unit of instruction. It was our building goal to have a common summative assessment for every unit of instruction in all the core courses by the end of the year, and we did indeed achieve that. There is a common assessment, and as you know, in our building, divided the way we are into separate houses, it's really important that we can make some assurances in the assessment process that not only students will they be assessed equitably, but the instruction is covering the same ground as well. And we did achieve that goal, and that was a long and actually arduous process, but very, very proud of the staff for what they accomplished there. And as part of that, the Language Arts Department has created a common rubric that is utilized for assessing progress in writing, which was utilized in its initial stages anyway, was utilized this year. And then the bottom bullet there is a piece that's missing. It should say 84% of 6th graders in math. And I just wanted to reflect on that one grade level, that in 6th grade they were extraordinarily successful with what they were doing in math instruction. Now, the general comment that I would make about the SMART goal process, we're going to move away from the type of SMART goal that you see here with regard to A's and B's. We are moving forward in our assessment process and moving, we think, more appropriately in the direction of trying to determine what's essential to know, what is the essential knowledge and skills that students need to have. And within those common assessments that we have, staff is now looking at really what's essential as opposed to important to know, good to know, nice to know, that sort of thing. So the SMART goals that you'll see us developing in the future will actually focus more on measuring student progress with regard to information, knowledge, and skills that we believe are essential for them to know, which not only reflect success in the state standards, but then also reflect the work that we're doing with pairing our standards and our instruction to HSD 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Koch. Before we move into the elementary SMART goals, I wanted to just mention that really for the first time we now have a data system in place where we can measure elementary-wide what our progress is toward our eventual target. And this particular, at the end of this year, we measured, it was nearly 80%, but it was 79.4% of all of our elementary students were reading at or above grade level. So that gives us really a district baseline to begin monitoring how the district is doing. So with that, we'll move into Mrs. Hamburg from EP Rock.
Thank you. I know I speak for everyone when I say that we're excited to share our success. And it is more of a challenge that we have 6 elementary schools. So one of the things we did is last summer we tried to develop a baseline, and as you know, that corresponded with our redrawing of the boundaries. So the baseline in some cases was a lot of students that we perhaps didn't know very well. So we were using their DRA and Fontes and Pinnell scores, and now at the end of this year, we're moving into next year really knowing our students much better. But our baseline last summer said that we had about 70% of our students reading at or above grade level, which was at first a little daunting. And at EP Rock, we came up with a slogan that we all made shirts, and it said, at EP Rock, we make it so. And it's really been our focus, not only helping students read at grade level, but looking at student growth, because so many of the students were new to EP Rock. We spent the year trying to get to know them and looking at their growth, because we didn't have an idea of whether or not it was going to be possible to meet our target, which we set at 80. And in the end, we achieved 79%, and we're very excited about that. Additional accomplishments, as I said, a lot of our students were new. In fact, about 1/3 to 1/2 of every classroom had all new students, and they came from 3 different buildings in the district. It's one of the things that's exciting about the new process is that we can measure students at Rock compared to students at Holton or Willow. So we're all using the same measure. And so when we redrew the boundaries, we also took 64 was the elementary number for English language learners. We had about 4 to 6 the year before, and we went to 32 English language learners. So it was a very exciting leap for our building. We were excited to have those students return to their neighborhood schools. We added staff to our building to help meet those needs. And so they're all in that percentage when we measured end-of-year success. The next thing that is highlighted for additional accomplishments is related to reading using the NWEA MAP assessments. All the principals also use that to measure growth, and at the end of the year we can look at individual students, and we can look at class composites, and there's nationally normed targets. This showed that 90% of the students grew. They may not have met the grade level target, but they grew. And I just want to share one example, and I think we've talked about MAP before, but students who are high achieving to begin with, we're watching their growth also, as well as the low students. The low students are expected to grow more RIT points than a student who's already at or above grade level. So I had 3 second graders whose targets were 21 points, which is pretty significant. And just to give you an idea, that will say then at the end of the year whether or not they met or exceeded the 21 points. And so for those 3 students, I had 3 second graders. One grew 19 points, so in the end it says -2 because he missed it by 2 points. But the fact that he grew 19 points was pretty fabulous. And then I had one that grew 30 points, so he was 9 points above his target. And then his target will be adjusted. All these students' targets will be adjusted next year. And one ELL learner who grew 37 points, so he was 16 points above his target. So that's just an example of the kinds of other reading assessments we're measuring. The 75% of the 4th graders, the reason I'm highlighting that one is because that was our grade level with the lowest baseline. So they went from 62 to 75% in reading at or above grade level. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hamburg. Mrs. Mitchell, Ms. Prather from Hudson Prairie. Sorry.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you tonight to kind of share the success that we've had in this last year at Hudson Prairie. It's been new learning for me and for my teachers to work together, and we're excited to share our success tonight. Our baseline data, we started out with 77% of our students reading at or above grade level. Our goal was 81%, and with all the work of the students and the staff and the families with the at-home reading program, we achieved our goal with 81.6% of our students reading at or above grade level, so we're very pleased with that data. we have a lot of accomplishments, and one of the things that, as a new principal, I worked with my teachers on really systemizing what are we doing with the whole SMART goal process. And one of our interventions that we have is the after-school program called Trailblazers. And we really took some time to research what we want this intervention program to be like. And so we used some of the research of Dick Allington on best practices, getting small groups, really focusing the student needs, the interventions on the student needs. So we had some students working on fluency with Read Naturally, some with vocabulary. So it was really systematic, small groups for those students that were below grade level. And with those students, the average growth that we look at in DRA and FNP is usually about 3 to 4 levels during a grade level. And with the intervention program, with the students that were in there, the average growth was 4 levels. So we did see that continued growth. And that's one of the things we principals are really monitoring, is that growth piece, to see that our interventions are working. So we were really proud to see our students growing in that after-school program. Another accomplishment that we have is 88% of our second graders were at or above grade level on the MAP assessment in the area of reading. And that is the first time that a second grader, that's the first time they have experience taking a computerized assessment. So 88% at or above grade level with the national norms is fabulous. So we were very thrilled by that. And another accomplishment that we wanted to note is our 4th grade teachers. They achieved 87% of the students reading at or above grade level. And if we talk to some of the teachers, they would probably say that's because of the strong collaboration they had as a team, really brainstorming what can we do to systemize interventions for these students. And they worked together as a team to really pull students that had similar needs and really give them the instruction that they needed at their grade level. So that 87% is great, and it's a great accomplishment and goal that we have for all of our grade levels, to really use that collaboration time and use the interventions to really help our students succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prather. And now, Mrs. Mitchell.
Good evening. As the other elementaries have used the student group, K-5 is Holton's student group as well. Our target is a bit higher. 90% of students were what we were aiming for, to be reading at or above grade level. We didn't quite make that target, fell short, similar to what we did last year. I do want to clarify the baseline data. That particular figure, 86%, is actually grades 1 through 5 in the fall when we assess them. And it's assessed at the beginning of 1st grade, for example, at what we would expect a beginning of the 1st grade to come in with. So it's kind of misleading when you think about what Dan had mentioned about middle school testing end of the year, 23% compared to 86% as a baseline. We measured 2 different things. Our end of the year result was 88% of our students reading at or above grade level, and we're pleased with that. It's still aiming for that 90%. The additional data accomplishments I want to share with you is particularly strong in 1st and 5th grade. 1st graders came in the 70% and exited at 92%. I attribute this largely to the collaboration of those 1st grade teachers and to their best practice. They both vested themselves highly in a program called Daily 5 and really collaborated daily and often during the day. We also had a volunteer community member come in every Wednesday and work with our students while the teachers worked with small groups every Wednesday on a volunteer basis. She's a substitute teacher in the district. And I think that really is the credit. The credit goes to them, because that's what attributes the 92% of our 1st graders reading at or above grade level. And that will set the foundation for all the other years as they go through. At the other end of the spectrum is our 5th graders. 95% of our 5th graders were reading at or above grade level. And of particular note is a 5th grader that we had that came with significant challenges. And despite those challenges, because of his motivation and his teacher's dedication, he progressed 2 grade levels this year. He came in at a 3rd grade level in November and actually exited just at the cusp of a 5th grade level. And we were all celebrating that success because he had a lot of challenges. On the last target, 68% of all of our 3rd through 5th grade students met or exceeded their overall targeted growth rate. As Amy had mentioned, the MAPS provides a target growth rate for students, and we're looking for growth in all of our students. And as she mentioned, our principal team is looking at that as a better measure of our SMART goals. And 68% is the highest percentage in the district of all 3rd through 5th grade students meeting or exceeding their target. And we're proud of that accomplishment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. And Mr. Schmidt from North Hudson.
Last August, I was able to meet with you all, and we were able to, at North Hudson, meet our SMART goal that year. This year, unfortunately, we did not. We had a baseline that we had 84% of our students at or above grade level to start the year. We set a stretch goal of 89%, and at the end of the year, our students had 76% of our students reading at or above grade level. Now, as the building leader, obviously, I'm not satisfied with those results. I spent quite a bit of time looking at our data and reflecting on the year, and one of the things that was a barrier was students that were just at grade level to start the year. So when we measured them at the beginning of the year, they're just at grade level, and we didn't sustain that, and so we didn't get a year's growth. And so one of the things that I have in place next year is a more systematic plan of monitoring. And so even these students that start the year right at grade level, and we expect that they'll keep that growth, if they have difficulty, teachers will be able to monitor right away and adjust so we get that full year. Now, with that said, there were a tremendous amount of accomplishments this year with our staff, and I want to talk about that as far as what they were able to do with student learning. And I'm going to start with 2 grade levels in particular, and I'll start with the bottom of the slide, and that's our 4th grade students. End the year, 88% of those students were at or above grade level. Looking at the MAPS assessment, that standardized nationally normed test that they take on computers, so excellent results there. The one I also want to talk about is our 2nd grade students, and they came in with a pretty good growth rate, 84%. And when we look at 1st grade, we know the research says their trajectory is really set. So if they come in through 1st flat or finish 1st flat with growth, that's probably the growth rate they're going to have. If they leave 1st grade with a high growth rate, that's going to continue. The exciting piece with this information is they had a really good growth rate coming into 1st grade, 2nd grade, they were able to increase it. So that is a really big success and something that those students probably will be able to build on throughout their elementary career and on. So we're really excited about that piece of information. The last one is really helpful, I think, to put it in a real complete perspective with our data. We had 86% of our students out of four out of 6 grade levels that were at or above grade level at the end of the year. So that would be 2 percentage points higher than our baseline. And for an administrator, that really shows me where my focus areas are. I know where I need to focus, areas where I have to get more feedback, more monitoring, and maybe more resources. I expect when I come back next year, I'll be talking about the successes we had with students 6 out of 6 grade levels, and I expect that we'll come back again and meet our SMART goal. So those are some of the successes that I know that our teachers are really proud of, and we can be proud of as far as our students too.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Grambo from Willow River.
Thank you and good evening. Well, as Ms. Prather mentioned, having this process roll through now for a complete year is really exciting. Last year felt as if I was reporting on something that I didn't fully understand. It was just so exciting to immerse myself in this and learn about the process. And we have some results that we're proud to report as well. We came in with the lowest baseline overall in the district at 69% of our students reading at or above grade level. And that was concerning. It was concerning to me. It was concerning to my staff. And they responded in kind. And our goal was 80%, and we were close. Our results, we met 79% of all of our students were reading at or above grade level. And there was a lot of pride in that. So it was an exciting process. As we talk about additional accomplishments, I think about them not only as additional accomplishments, but also another way to tell the same story, another way to dig deeper and tell the story in a way that a different audience might understand. And that's what the first bullet is about. It says the students moved a total of 1,640 reading levels as measured by formal reading assessments. Well, that measure was really intended for the audience of the students. We felt that it was important that our students understood what this goal was all about. And 80% and 79%, that doesn't really mean a whole lot to an elementary student. But counting those levels of growth really did. It was an exciting process for them because we were able to celebrate. Every time we met 500 levels of growth, we had a celebration within the school. And it was fun to get them involved in the SMART goal process as well. And now that will really serve as our baseline. We actually then averaged that out, and it was 4.34 levels of growth per student. Now what we can do with that is use that as another baseline, another way to kind of analyze our data. The second point that you see is that each grade 3 through 5 class met their overall goal in their projected growth on the MAPS assessment. Now what that's all about, again, it's another way to look at some of the same data. We're looking at the reading data, now it's a different assessment. We want to make sure that our data matches. We want to make sure that the assessments that we're giving are telling at least a similar story, and if they're not, then that's some information for us. We need to dig deeper and find out what it is. Why is there a discrepancy between those assessments? Having each class meet their projected growth was something we're very proud of. And then the last bullet there, this tells the story of an individual team, and I think it was Mrs. Mitchell that mentioned her first grade and the collaborative spirit that they embraced, and that's exactly what I attribute the tremendous growth of our second grade at Willow River to. 76% of the students in second grade were reading at or above grade level at the end of the year. That's compared to 58% at the beginning, resulting in an 18% increase, and this team, I'm very proud of what they've done. I know they're proud of what they've done. They really embrace this collaborative spirit, and in many ways they exemplify what we'll be looking for and looking to try to implement in our common planning schedule that we've put together for next year. They work together, and every time they got together, every time I was with them, the conversation was always about student learning. They sat down, they got down to business, said, okay, here are the students that need our help. What are we going to do to make it happen? And they did make it happen.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Grambo and Mrs. Hodges from Rivercrest.
Good evening. Our student group was also K-5, and our stretch goal was 80% of all of our students to be reading at or above. Our baseline data started out at 72%. What was interesting at Rivercrest is we didn't know the students and the students didn't know us, so we didn't have background knowledge like you do a lot of times when you've had the kids over time. But we were pleased to report at the end of the year that we did meet our goal at 80%, and I attribute that to a lot of hard work from a lot of people. So, our first additional accomplishment that I'd like to talk about is that when I was analyzing the data, I noticed that a lot of the kids, if not quite there, were really close, and when I looked closer, it was actually 85%. So we did have a tremendous number of kids who were very close to meeting the goal. Our fourth graders, I would attribute my fourth grade success and the second grade as, again, I feel like within a year I've really, our teams have really established strong collaboration, but at those two grade levels in particular, they really collaborated strongly. So 85% of our fourth graders reading at or above grade level as measured by the MAPS, and then 89% of the second graders reading at or above grade level based on spring assessments. I was especially pleased with that second grade score, again, based on, I see really hardworking teachers who collaborate. We have a lot of, again, for first year school, we have a lot of volunteers in. We have community support. We've had more support this year here than I've had probably ever, and it's because we've really reached out strongly, and I attribute that a lot to the staff and our collaboration as a school and as grade level teams. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hodges. Real quickly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the importance of monitoring, and if Diane, you could advance to the next slide. One of the things that the administrators and I have been working on is the professional development centered around the planning, implementing, and monitoring stage. And I really think that this is something that the board has been interested in for a long time, is how do you monitor what our implementations are? How do you measure success? And this is a practice that we really have focused focused a lot on. There's solid research behind it, and you can go to the next slide, that talks about for schools and systems that highly monitor, use high monitoring systems, the gains for students can be up to 5 times the gains compared to schools that don't have monitoring systems in place. So you might be asking yourself, what do you monitor? And sorry, I don't. There's a couple of pieces. One is monitoring of the implementation. And so when we invest monies into an implementation such as assessment for learning, such as literacy, we monitor to make sure that that implementation is happening. And we do that in a variety of different ways, but we definitely monitor through things like learning walks and through the evaluation system, through all sorts of practices that help us to monitor what is the guarantees of that particular implementation. And then finally, what you've heard a little bit about tonight is the results of the implementation, is what's the impact then on students. Finally, sometimes people might think, they might feel like the monitoring piece is actually heavy, kind of a thumbs down sort of approach. But really what the research goes to show is that teachers want to know that they're making a difference. That builds their sense of efficacy and their sense of what I'm doing makes an impact. And so what monitoring does, and when you measure, it actually helps teachers to know and have really solid data that because of their practices, students are performing at a higher rate. So with that, I'd like to turn it over for questions and comments from the board for either myself or any of our principals.
Thanks, Peg. Board members have questions?
I had one question and a comment. My question, I think, was for Mr. Koch. When you talked about the math and the language arts and the work that they're doing, just remind me because I don't recall, do both of those areas have common planning time today, or did they during the last school year as part of the way that they were able to achieve what they did in their SMART goals?
Yes, this was the first year that there was grade level common planning time for those teachers, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. The second one isn't really a question, but it's a comment about how you characterize the numbers, because I think you're selling yourselves short. And I didn't catch it until Mr. Grambo did his presentation, but I suspect it could apply to most of you. So, Mr. Grambo, you said you moved I can't remember which grade it was, went from 58% at or above grade level to 76% at or above grade level. That's not an 18% increase, that's an 18 percentage point increase, but it's actually a 30% increase in the students in that classroom that are at or above grade level. So instead of saying 1 out of every 5 was moved up, you moved 1 out of every 3 up to their grade level. So I would encourage you all to go back and look at your numbers, because you have a much better story than maybe what your numbers even reflect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bart. Cindy?
And I just have a quick comment for you as a group. I just think this is outstanding, and I know that, a lot of you were mentioning that you had set a higher goal than what you achieved, but we asked you to do that. We asked you to stretch, and we told you that we were going to be pleased with progress, and we really are. You guys are just astounding, and I think as a group, as individual buildings, I'm so proud of all of you for really pulling this together and really committing yourselves. And I know that you feel a lot more embedded in this year than you did last year. And last year I thought that you had a pretty high commitment, but this year I just feel like you're in it all the way up. And thanks for all your hard work, and thank your buildings too, all your staff and your teachers and just everybody there, and your students.
Okay. Tom.
Dan, I just wanted to compliment everyone on a job well done, and how proud I am of the fact that we're part of a district that is measuring results and measuring performance. I think it's critical. I remember being told at one time that it was not possible to do in the educational field. obviously you're all proving that that's not true. And while I know that, congratulations to everybody that made their goal, congratulations to everybody really for even those that didn't make their goal, for the process and also for the growth, because really I think what we need to celebrate is the growth. The goals are set there to reach for and hopefully attain, but really the nugget is really the growth, and in most cases we've seen that, and even in the case with North Hudson, I can tell that doesn't feel good, and it'll just create more energy. And I can already tell from Mr. Smith's report that there's been a lot of work already been done to analyze the data, and we're proud of North Hudson as much as anybody else. So, two questions. One is, how do you get at the goals? How do you determine? I mean, how do you determine that I'm going to go from 72 to 80? Or is there any science to that? Or are you just kind of picking it out of the air? Anyone?
I better say something.
You got the short straw.
I think that we look at several factors. One of them is past history. What have these students been able to do in the previous year? What are their MAP results showing? What are their achievement results? And cognitive abilities, and what can they produce? Another factor would be when we look at the inside ring of the system of learning, what support and resources are available? What can we count on? The unanticipated blessing of that substitute coming in on Wednesdays was something we did not project, and we're thrilled with, and it markedly made a difference in our first graders. Another factor is the teachers, the teaching team, and the time that they can invest into reading or math, depending on what the SMART goal is. And like with the common planning time that middle school had and that we're building into the elementary program for next year, those are all the resources and support that help us kind of predict what's a reasonable level that we can attain. And it's a stretch for some of them.
Certainly. Well, my congratulations for setting those goals high and accomplishing the growth. The second question I have, and I'll try to be brief, is that I'm certain that there are a number of factors that are driving the results. But is there, in your estimation, or from what you've seen, is there a principal driver that has resulted in these accomplishments? Is it the teachers? Is it a change of curriculum? Is it the collaborations? I mean, is there anything? I suppose it's all of that, but is there any one thing that you noticed that said, boy, this is really ringing the bell?
I'd say it's all of the above. I think it's driven because it really started with that SMART goal process 4 years ago. That started the drive of everything, and then it spread out. And now it's our system.
Yeah, it's a culture.
I would add to that.
Dan, can you come up to the mic, please?
When you're considering factors, I think I'd like to offer up the fact that collaboration is a huge element here in terms of colleagues being able to work with and support their colleagues to commonly set goals, to together analyze the data, as opposed to one person doing the work independently. You have a variety of minds now and perspectives taking a look at the information. So I wouldn't short shrift collaboration by any means in that process.
And just to get a word in, I was thinking that focus, and that's what the SMART goal team process does, is it focuses and aligns everything around learning. And principals know who their kids are that aren't learning. They know who their kids are that have already learned. And so it really is focus on learning.
Dan, one more comment?
Sure. Cindy?
Just something that I've thought about, but I'm reminded now, and that is that, probably in the history of our district, students whole grade levels have experienced huge growth or have backslid tremendously. I mean, that probably has been happening forever. I don't know why it wouldn't. But what I really value and think is really critical for us as a district is that seeing it, we have the opportunity to intervene systematically in the way that our students are going to grow or backslide, to ensure that we're coming up under them and continuing to push them up instead of letting them slide back and then relying on another year to have a bigger, a harder time catching up, or for them to get to a different school level and then have to try to catch up. And I really think that the biggest success for you as a group and for us as a district is being absolutely certain, being able to say without reservation that we know and that we can come up underneath the students that are struggling, or the ones that are just above their grade level and not really being given more every day. And so I think that's the joy of this, and that's what I think we should all be celebrating, as well as celebrating all the individual achievements. To celebrate that as a district is pretty astounding. I don't think we could trade that for all the coffee beans in Columbia.
Okay, Mark?
I'm supposed to tea in China. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Some very impressive results here, ladies and gentlemen. I would really term some of them absolutely extraordinary. We have some real home runs here, no doubt about it, so my hat's off to you. For those whose goals were not met or slightly under, I guess I want to offer my understanding and encouragement. These aren't standardized products here. We're not stamping out widgets. This is education, and I'm always drives me crazy when people make comparisons and that. And this is a unique environment. I fully expect some goals not to be met. And that's going to be the nature of the game. It's a very, very challenging environment that you're working in. I certainly liked what I heard by way of response. I have no doubt that those that fell a little bit short this year will be meeting their goal in the very near future. And lastly, I think I just want to again applaud your courage at doing this. This is I can't think of too many professions held this kind of accountability. Really putting yourselves in a line, being measured like this is really quite a challenge. And I think most of us don't have to lay it on the line like that. And I just really acknowledge and applaud your courage, and thank you for what you're doing for the students of our district.
Thanks, Mark. Lynn?
I have a question. Can somebody tell me how Ms. Hamburg, I think you spoke about how the individual maps reading goals by students. How does that process work? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. One of the things that's maybe a little deceiving in using the DRA, we're using a baseline, and we're expecting the kids that are already at grade level to be at grade level at the end of the year. But the kids who are below grade level have to grow obviously more than a year. So the MAP test is an equal interval test, and so it measures, it's been normed, and it's been given to hundreds of thousands of kids every spring and every fall. So we can more closely measure what a student should grow in 9 months. And so it's what we are using to kind of validate our internal reading scores. And so, we've always probably compared to other students in other districts been above the norm, but that test allows us to look more closely at students' growth. And so I think it's really a more exciting way to measure our accomplishments, because it measures every student compared to the score they get in the fall. Then we look at it in the spring, and it's using those national norms. I don't know if that helps, but come watch them take it sometime. It's very exciting.
So it sounds like we can focus our instruction on individual learners and
Right.
where they need to grow.
And it's broken down in many ways to help teachers with specific strands of reading and math, and they can focus their energies on a student group that scored in a particular range they can very easily target their instruction, which is our goal.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other board members? And I also want to thank each of you for the work that you put into this. I see some of the challenges just with many of you being new in your positions and just getting to know the schools and the students and all that. So I applaud you for dealing with those challenges, and I can rock with all the new students and the ELL students. And so there are a lot of instances out there that add the additional challenges to what you have to do. I do have a question for Ed, and I guess I'm trying to deal with this. To me, it seems like it was sort of the reduction of Fs and that piece. To me, it almost seems like maybe a more positive way of presenting it would be the number of students that have moved up to A, B, C level or something like that. Can you just tell me how you decided to use that approach versus, maybe the increased number of students that have, progressed up to the ABC level?
Sure. Because we're a high-performing district, we have many students who are very successful. And it seems like the students at the lower end of the continuum are, obviously, they're the ones who struggle the most, but they are also the ones who get forgotten the most. And there's a shifting of attitude at the secondary level, at the high school level, that students choose to fail. And that's been if students aren't doing the work, that's their choice. And we've changed that attitude now with our teachers from the standpoint of we're not allowing students to do that anymore. It's going along with no option to fail. The encouragement of students at the lower end of the continuum is exceedingly important, because there's the groups those are the two groups, the Ds and the Fs, that seem to be struggling the most. And in the process of working with assessment, teachers are better able now to understand where it is that the students are failing and the students are struggling. And we really wanted to focus on that particular group. We knew that the upper students, the higher achieving students, were going to be successful. We needed to redirect our energies to really put a focus on the assessment piece, which is key for making student gains across all levels. Now, as we've gone through this process for a couple of years, our focus is beginning to change, because we have a baseline established, we have foundational practices, best practices in place, and as we begin to develop professional learning communities with individual planning times, such as with next year, we're focusing on biology. We have our 9th grade English teachers on common planning time, and we have our Algebra 1 teachers on common planning time. So we'll be building up with another level of working with assessment next year that we can branch off and be more specific. But in trying to bring an entire staff together, especially a diversified staff at the high school with 15 different departments, it was hard to find a goal that at the beginning was going to include all students. And we're better able to equip that now, or we're better equipped to be able to move in another direction with our goals, such as focusing with A's, B's, C's, now more specifically in individual courses as the system changes.
Okay, thanks, Ed. That makes sense. Any other questions, comments? Mary?
PEG started out with the HSD system for learning. And our principals, if we just think of these teachers lined up right next to them who support this work as well, have really demonstrated that system and building the capacity. We're not there yet, but we're creating more capacity to support more learners to be successful at higher levels. And that's what they've talked about, and they're demonstrating that with the results that they're sharing with you from the hard work that they're doing and the work that their teacher and the rest of their support staff are doing as well. I think of the continuous progress that this system for learning really represents. And that's what they've been talking about. You heard so many comments about what they're going to do next or how they're going to improve. Their plan to move on up. And that's what it's all about. And that's what we're saw demonstrated tonight. They won't be surprised when I say this next comment, but we are raising expectations. And I don't believe any of our leaders out there are satisfied with the results that we're receiving. There's still kids that aren't making it yet, that aren't reading at grade level or aren't succeeding at grade level. And so that's what this is all about, building our capacity to continue to have more students succeed and at higher levels. So it's not just the bottom, but it's all the way through the system that we'll be raising those levels of achievement. And I sent out to you a video clip of an airplane in flight. We are building that airplane as we go. And I think of a really good example. I just talked about it with his teachers, and at elementary level, we're still in the process of professional development and best practices in literacy. So these teachers are being held accountable for results and yet don't have the best practices in place yet. So I really commend all of our leaders and for our teachers for really sticking our neck out to build this system and to hold ourselves accountable as we move forward to make sure that it does produce results for all of our students. Thanks, gang.
Thanks, Peg. Thanks, principals. Appreciate those reports. We're going to move on to the 2009-10 preliminary budget. Tim?
Okay. That's a tough act to follow. The report on page 35 of the board packet, I'll talk about a little bit about the layout of the report, and then I'll just highlight some of the major changes to it when we're looking at budget for 2009-2010. And this is the preliminary look at the budget. At the expense of being redundant, we still have figures to come out from the Department of Revenue and DPI in October, so that we'll get our final numbers. But as far as the expenditures in the preliminary budget, they're fairly solid. I wouldn't expect to see a lot of major movement one way or the other on these numbers. So the layout of the report, first column, the 2008-2009, is a fiscal year-to-date activity. These numbers are unaudited at this point. Our audit starts next week, and we still do have some expenditures that have to be processed yet, invoices that are still coming in, and some other adjustments to make, but the numbers are fairly solid here. For comparison purposes, the middle column is the 2008-2009 budget, and then the 2009-2010 preliminary budget is the last column. Starting with that top line, which is a local property tax levy, and you'll see that's moving from $21,673,000 to an estimate of $23,840,000, so about a $2.2 million increase. If you look at total revenues, but we budgeted $22,355,000, and they're going up to $24,354,000. Going down to about the middle of that page, if you look under the account number all the way on the left-hand side, 10R621, and that's equalization aid, and those are the state aids that we talk about so much. And in the first column, you'll see we've got equalization aid of $22,798,000. And if you go a few lines down from that, 10R718, there's something titled Federal Stimulus Replacement Aid, and that's $2,931,000. If you add those two together, that equals the 08-09 budget figure next to the fiscal year-to-date activity of $25,730,000. What the state has done for 2008-2009 is they have used their stimulus dollars from the federal government to replace a reduction in aid to the school districts. So it's a net sum of zero, so to speak. So it nets each other. The net gain is zero. It's just a replacement of aid via the federal stimulus package. You can see, reading across all the way to the right-hand side under that equalization aid, the preliminary projection from DPI of $23,035,000, and that's that $2.7 million decrease in aid over the previous year. So comparing that to the $25 million. Moving down, if you go down to the bottom portion of the revenues, and you look at account 10R990, that's miscellaneous revenue. If you recall, we received the approximately $1.8 million from the closure of the TIF district, and so that's why we've got that large number there under the 0809 and the 0809 budget, and you'll see that number drops back down to a normal level for the 910 budget. Next section is our expenditures, and we've got salary and benefit expenditures, and I won't go through all of these items. I'll hit on the major expenditure categories. If you turn the next page, go to the next page, and you go to purchase services. You'll see we do have some pretty substantial increases over the 0809 budget. We're down about $500,000. We've decreased those expenditures about $500,000. If you look at the next section, which are non-capital objects, again, a fairly large increase of about just above $200,000. And you'll see in capital objects, which is the 10E5 category, you'll see an amount there for building acquisition, and that is that's the portion of the Rivercrest construction that came out of the general fund that was supplemented with general fund dollars. So that was 1.3 million was budgeted in 0809, and so that goes away in 910. And then we've got a couple of other categories, but fairly small. If you go down to the 10E8 or 827, and that's special education funding. That's the portion of the special education fund that is subsidized by the general fund, and you'll see that drops down from a budget of 5.5 million down to 4.3 million. So we've got about a $1,200,000 decrease there, and that's because, of course, we received our stimulus dollars via federal special education funding. And so those dollars are used in special education, thus they decrease the amount that's contributed by the general fund. And then we wind up with total expenditures of $49,709,000. That's preliminary for our 0809 year, and versus a budget of $51,435,000. And then we budgeted $49,425,000 for 910. And you can see the last line are the excess of expenditures over or under revenues. And at this point, it looks to be like we will be under our revenues, and that's that $1,029,000 is a very preliminary number at this point until we get everything closed out, but we will be somewhere close to that number for expenditures under revenues. And then for 910, we've got $1,050,000, and that's the $900,000. That's the other half of the TIF revenue, which comes out of fund balance. And then we've held aside some additional funds just to finish up some loose ends on the Rivercrest project. So, if you move to the next page, we've got a preliminary mill rate calculation based on all the expenditures. And so again, you can see all of the history there going back to 1989, 1990. And if you look at 2009, 2010, district valuation, we're under the assumption that that's being held flat at $3,724,000. And again, the number will come out from the Department of Revenue in October on what that number actually will be. And that number will have an effect on our mill rate. So depending on whether it goes up or down or stays flat. But right now we're saying it stays flat at 0. The total levy is $28,400,000, and that's adding the general fund levy and then a debt service levy of about $4,560,000, and so we get the total levy amount of $28,400,000. And currently under this estimate, that would be a 8.25% change over the previous year's levy, and then that would be also an 8.25% change over the previous year's mill rate, because we're holding the property value level. Any questions at this point?
Any questions for Tim? Brian?
Just a couple of comments. So just of note is if you look at line 10R621, I mean, we're getting 2.7 million less from the state for this year. And even though I think we've done we've really combed through the budget and reduced the, budget $2 million. We're still looking at a, 8.4% tax increase, for the school portion of the taxes that our taxpayers are going to face. So I'm not happy with that. The fact that that's what that's where we are right now. What's if we get if we had a 0% increase in salary and benefits? What would be the tax increase for the? What would be the mill rate increase?
If we looked at 0%, that would be approximately upper 4s to lower 5s percentage-wise from last year's mill rate to the 9/10 mill rate.
I just want to clarify, Tim, is that salary only or is salary and benefits?
That's salary and benefits with the exception of the absorbed health insurance, a small increase that we had.
So,
Mark?
Oh, thanks, Dan. My question kind of, I guess, ties in with Brian's here. How is the district valuation? I mean, we're hoping it stays the same. To be quite frank, that sounds, I guess, optimistic. I don't know how much new construction we've had, and I got to assume that all existing property values have declined because that's the way it's been here. How will that actually be determined? I mean, normally I'm sure they go by sales or new construction activity, et cetera, and then, it can be parceled out by the evaluation and the mill rate's determined. But now, we got, I mean, what's going to happen to my home value when I open up my bill in December? I guess I'm expecting to see it less because that would truly reflect market value, Tim. But how's that going to be determined?
Well, that's determined by the state. Mm-hmm. The equalization office, particularly the office out of Eau Claire. I've had some preliminary discussions with them, but again, very preliminary. They're still putting their data together, so they weren't able to give me a very good indication of where we exactly think we're going to wind up with the values. So 0 is probably middle ground. It's pretty tough to hit, when you don't know. When you have no guidance on those numbers, right. That's pretty tough to pick something. Obviously, we don't want to pick anything that's showing increases because we don't think there will be. How much the decrease would be is a tough, really tough question to answer too.
And I understand why you're using 0 for these purposes. I guess my concern is just that to me, quite frankly, 0 seems optimistic. I can't imagine my home not having decreased in value as all property all throughout our school district. So my concern would be with the drop in valuation, 8.25% would be, would be inadequate. Obviously, the mill rate would have to be higher. I've been here now 20 years and my home has never decreased in value. So, but clearly it has this year has every piece of property in our district. So. I think that's just something to be aware of. It wouldn't surprise me to see a district valuation drop.
Yeah, we some of the discussion with the equalization office was that at the time that the commercial properties in raw land were holding. So depending on the mix and the percentage there, that would help buoy up the price. But again, it's pretty tough at this point without that guidance to know exactly what that number is going to be.
Understood. Thanks.
Any other questions for Tim? Lynn?
Tim, you mentioned on special education funding the change, and I can't find the line right now on revenue.
Oh, sure.
And then you also mentioned the federal stimulus offset. Can you point that out to me? I'm not finding
Sure.
it.
Well, why don't I'll go back to on that first page. First, under the revenue section, and there's the equalization aid, and then there's under 10R718, which is federal stimulus replacement aid.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, so you see that the federal stimulus replacement aid is $2,931,303, and that's the portion that the state's replacing our normal state aid with. That's how they're filling the gap in their budget with their stimulus dollars. Then there's a second piece to that, which is really the aid that comes to the district from the federal government.
Right.
And that, if you go to the second page, and that's going to be number 10E827, and this is a net expenditure from the general fund through special education operations. And what's happened there is we received $1,072,000 in stimulus funding through a regular flow-through grant, and then another $50,000 roughly in there's another piece of grant that there was some stimulus attached to for early childhood, and then we had some carryover from our previous grant, and so that totals about $1.2 million, and those dollars are all being used in special education, and because they're used in special education, they help offset the expenditure to the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Tim, can you just briefly talk about this, again, being a preliminary budget, but between now and October, what are going to be some of the factors that are going to cause this to change? For example, enrollment. You talked about evaluation being received from the state. What other?
Sure. The big pieces are aid is based on expenditures of all school districts in the state, and that data does not come in until and it doesn't get compiled until October. So the aid number that we have here is based on a set of assumptions by DPI at this point, really their best data right now, and they're going off of budgets that have been submitted by school districts during the year. And so that data tends to be a little old right now because now we're past the end of the year. So all of the actual information has to be submitted after the school district goes through its annual audit. And then the state compiles all of those numbers, and based on all of the different formulas, then they're able to derive what the exact amount of aid is for each district. And so that's on the aid piece. And of course, if that aid number goes up or down, that will have a direct impact on the levy. The other piece that has an impact on the levy, and the piece of data that doesn't come until October, is from the Department of Revenue, and that's on the property valuations. So if we see that number decrease, as Mark was mentioning, then we would see an increase in the mill rate. If we see the property values increase, then we would see a corresponding decrease in the mill rate. So those are the two largest factors right now.
Okay, thanks, Tim. That's helpful. Mary?
Tim, the percentage decrease in our aid, what was that?
It was 10.48%.
And I just want to re-emphasize, I know the board and the administration is very concerned about our taxpayers and what they're experiencing through this recession. And the goal has been to keep the increase on the mill rate for this year as low as possible. With that decrease in revenue, and as Brian talked about, all of the budget reductions, including some layoffs that we have worked through at $2 million plus, it still is impacting our taxpayers if all of the assumptions move forward from here with an increase in the mill rate of 8.25%. And certainly that's not what the goal of this board is. And the board has worked very hard to lower the impact on our taxpayers. And without the concessions from our union groups, it may be this high. But we need to realize that the state talked about a 3.1% decrease in aid because of their budget situation, and yet that translated to us at over 10%. And we certainly wish there was another way not to pass this on to our taxpayers. But this is the situation as it stands today.
Okay, we'll move on. Topics for action. We have consent items listed in the agenda. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent items, including, someone have the expenditures?
Yeah, I got it. Mr. President, move to approve the consent items, including the Director of Financial Services be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $2,543,483.11.
We have a motion by Brian.
Second.
Second by Barb. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion's approved. We'll move on to committee reports. Barb, with Learning and Program Development Committee.
As you can see, the committee met on July 23rd. We focused on a couple of areas. Corey McIntyre and Amy Hamburg came to the committee meeting and presented information about our English language learner population and the programs and services in the district to serve those students. Plans are underway to provide additional staff development supporting our ELL students in this upcoming year. And then Principal Hamburg talked about the success of the summer swimming program for many of those students, and hopefully some of you saw the article that was in the Hudson Star-Observer last week that really highlighted that program as well. Secondly, Corey McIntyre presented a draft of the plan that the district has completed. Again, this is a draft to address the stages of the pandemic. The plan was created using guidelines from the Centers for Disease Control and the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Wisconsin Department of Public Health. Mr. McIntyre worked in the district with other administrators, principals, building and grounds, as well as the school nursing staff to put together the draft. The plan is very comprehensive. It lays out the district response and recovery for each stage of that pandemic. Sandy talked about the WKCE test results and presented those test results at a disaggregated level to the committee. And finally, the committee adjourned to a closed session for purposes of deliberating on a potential contract. So, any questions?
Okay. Any questions for Barb? Thank you, Barb. We'll move on to Facilities and Grounds. Tom?
The Facilities and Grounds Committee met on August 5th, and there were 3 agenda items, and we went to closed session. The first agenda item was tabled. Holton Long-Term Solution was tabled to a future date, a future meeting. We did talk about the update on the Rivercrest Pond work, and happy to report that the testing of infiltration rates have been done, and we have been cleared by Stevens Engineering for those ponds working appropriately. We also have had a visual observation that seems to indicate that the ponds are infiltrating properly, so that's good news. So that there's good runoff now. So we also spoke about and heard from Corey about the pandemic flu plan, which is very comprehensive, and thank you, Barb, for giving my report. I would just ditto all of that. And then we, as Ed said, went into closed session for the purposes of deliberating about the sale and our purchase of public properties.
Okay. Any questions for Tom? Thank you. We'll move on to Personnel and Negotiations. Mark.
Thanks, Dan. Personnel Committee also met last week, August 5th. We received an update on elementary classroom enrollments and staffing from Nancy Sweet. And big surprise, the numbers continue to change, as she told us they would, up and down and across the board. The committee decided to accept Nancy's and the administration's recommendation on holding off on making final teaching assignments to be closer to the end of the year, as the numbers are still very much in flux. In addition to that, there is some enrollment pressure at the middle school, and since we have no additional positions budgeted for that, the committee decided that with the additional, I think, 2.4 positions that we have left, that some of that may be used for relief at the middle school. And we decided that we'd grant the discretion for the administration to assign those as needed between now and the start of the school year. And following that, we also had a closed session for the purpose of deliberating to prepare for negotiations with all our union employee groups.
Okay. Any questions for Mark? Not. Thank you, Mark. We'll move on to Finance Committee. Brian?
Thanks, Dan. The Finance Committee meeting met last night. Had 5 agenda items. The first one was that we had the president of WEA Trust, Mark Moody, at our meeting. And WEA Trust is the insurance for our staff. So it was interesting to have the president there. What sparked the president's attendance there was a concern I had was when we were trying to get basic information so we could benchmark the dollar per value of our insurance. There was a comment made that if we did that we'd be removed from the pool and that we'd be measured by our own experience. And so I wanted Mark to kind of explain their business model so I understood why they did that. So I have a better feel for their business model now, but I also explained to Mark that, you know, I as the treasurer and our board has a fiduciary duty to our taxpayers to make sure that we're benchmarking one of our biggest cost items to make sure that for everyone's benefit we're getting high value to the dollar, and that and I asked him for suggestions how we should do that, and didn't really get a great answer there. He said he talked about trusting him, and so I said that's a challenge for us. So of note also is we talked a little bit about what is the impact if we were actually moved out of the pool into just our own experience, and because our number in enrollees in the program is over 500, if you look statistically. There's a very little spread. There's very little variance in terms of being in the pool or outside the pool. In fact, we're the largest school district in the state of Wisconsin in the pool, so which I thought was interesting. So a good conversation with Mark. We appreciate him coming out, and I think we're a little more informed now of their business model. So, any questions on that? Barb, Dan, anything else to add on that? Okay. Next agenda item was the Hoffman fee. We just discussed contractual payment due to Hoffman and approved that. Fourth quarter financials reviewed that, and the efforts being made to really come under budget where possible, given the situation. We reviewed the preliminary budget for 2009 that we already covered. And then we issued a RFP for banking services and reviewed that. So,
thanks, Brian. Any questions for Brian? Okay, thanks again. Well, I'll talk about Governance and Policy Committee, which I chair. There are a few items on the agenda. The delegate assembly resolutions. There's a due date coming up on that in mid-September. For us or any school district to submit resolutions for the delegate assembly when they meet in January. We will need a delegate this year, so I know you're all clamoring to be delegates for the assembly, so give that some thought and let me know if you have an interest in serving. Policies and procedures. Nancy walked us through some of the new policies, academic accommodations for religious beliefs, open enrollment, evaluation, and granting credit for selected courses taken at the middle level. So we just had a preliminary discussion on that, and that will be coming back to the board next month. We also spent some time talking about a board workshop, which we have not had for a while. And the idea behind this is for us as a board, sort of in the spirit of our strategic planning and, you know, goals to improve all of the school district and the staff development and the concentration that we put in sort of raising the level of performance at all levels. We as a board shouldn't be immune from looking at our own process and seeing if there may be ways that we can improve how we work as a board. And so What I would like to propose is, and I think the committee agreed that we move forward with this, is that we do have a workshop that takes a look at that. We would likely be working through a facilitator that's out of the Wisconsin Association of School Boards in helping us work through that process. I've met with this person. I know Mary has met with this individual, and she's very familiar with how boards work and operate, and she has some good ideas in terms of, offering some suggestions that I think would be helpful to us as a better functioning board. So, with that, in your materials, you have some proposed dates for this workshop. It would be on a Saturday morning, I think we talked about, for a 3-hour period. Oh, 4 hours? Okay. So a 4-hour period on a Saturday morning. And the dates we're looking at is September 26th, October 3rd, October 24th, and October 31st. So if you could look at those dates with your calendar and then turn in that form that Mary's included with the packet, or call Diane or Mary and let her know what of those dates work for you. We'll go ahead and schedule that up. Any questions regarding that? Okay. That concludes the Governance and Policy Committee report. Do we have any citizens request to speak? No? Okay. With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statutes 19.85, Parent 1E, for the purpose of deliberating about the sale and or purchase of public properties and deliberating to prepare for negotiations with all union employee groups.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mark.
Second.
Second by Lynn. We'll have a roll call vote.
Robson, aye.
Bell, aye.
Kaisershot, aye.
Holland, aye.
Chernahoy, aye.
Crimmins, aye.
Van Loon and I.
The motion's approved. Thanks everyone for coming, especially the principals for giving your reports tonight.